Hello and welcome everyone. Happy November and a very happy Tuesday to all of you. Today is the fourth session of our Day One and Beyond series, which takes you through a series of topics and activities related to building out on Oracle Cloud. These events are hosted on Cloud Customer Connect, which is our Oracle community forum for customers and users. If you're not already a member, please create a free account, join in discussions, post questions, and look for upcoming events on various topics. Even the new events in these series will be posted there. My name is Renu Bhatt. I'm a TPM with the Customer Enablement team. And today I'm joined by Olivia Ferda and Joey Hall, both cloud engineers here at Oracle. And really thankful to our content experts, Larry Bisley and Creighton Swank, for joining as well. Before I hand it over to them, a quick reminder to use the Q&A box down at the bottom of the screen for any questions throughout the session. We might have a Q&A session at the end if we have time. And yes, this session is being recorded. We'll have the replay posted up on the community forum. Feel free to share the recording link with your colleagues who could not make it today. With that, I will hand it over to Joey.
Thank you for that introduction, Renu. So as Renu mentioned, this is the fourth session of our Day One and Beyond series. This is the Operations Quick Start. So in the last couple of sessions, we covered OCI at a high level. We talked about a couple specific areas in terms of setting up your environment, setting up your networking infrastructure, setting up your governance and administration pieces, a little bit of identity and access management. The Operations Quick Start today, we're really going to show you a bunch of different tools that you have at your disposal to help manage, deploy, configure your resources once you actually get into OCI and begin working with all of these different services. So today I am joined by a couple of my team members, Olivia Ferda and Creighton Swank.
Hi, everyone. I'm Olivia Ferda. I'm also a cloud engineer on the customer enablement team, and I specialize in today's topic, which is operations.
And hi all, thanks for letting me join. Name's Creighton Swank. I'm a field CTO aligned to the manufacturing industry here at Oracle. I've been at Oracle for about 2 years, and before that have done many roles in IT, including operationalizing a large-scale multi-cloud deployment.
And once again, I am Joey Hall, also a staff cloud engineer on the customer enablement team. And here's what we're going to go over today. So from the top, we're going to go over how can you actually access OCI. There are going to be a bunch of different areas that we're going to go over in terms of the command line, different software development kits using the Oracle Cloud Shell and code editors. We'll view those in the console as well. We'll talk about Resource Manager for Terraform deployments, monitoring, notifications, and events to help identify what's going on within your tenancy and maybe take some action upon that. Functions as well to go along and integrate with some of those other services for some automated deployments there. And then we'll talk about observability and management platform at the end and cover some key takeaways. Throughout the presentation, also feel free to put those questions in the chat. We can answer them as they go, and we'll try to leave some time at the end for Q&A as well for stuff that we don't get during the presentation. And what do we expect everyone to get out of this training? So this is a foundational training. We're going over operations at a high level and making you aware of a lot of these different tools and services that you can utilize. So really the objectives here are for you to be able to know what these different tools are, describe them, know when and why you would use these different tools. So here you say explore those different ways for accessing OCI and determining the best method depending on what your use case is. We're going to have some discussion around Terraform and talking about how you can utilize Terraform to provision and configure your resources within the console. So just understanding that and be able to describe that. And also the different tools you have available to you for observability and management. So monitoring, things you need for audit, alerts, notifications, so that you can then be aware of what's happening in your tenancy and taking action upon it. So just generally being aware of what these tools are and when and why you would use them. We like to show this at the beginning of each of our presentations just to kind of hone into what we are actually going to be talking about here. So in terms of operations, we're going to go into a couple of specific areas. So we'll talk about containers and functions a little bit. We'll talk about some governance pieces. Observability and management will be mentioned, but operations really is going to span across all of these different services because it's going to be how can you monitor them? how can you configure these different resources? How can you manage these resources to work together within your environment and get visibility and perform those day-to-day operations that you might need to within OCI? So we're really going to kind of touch upon all of these within this presentation, whereas some of our other ones might focus more into any of these specific areas. So to start things off, what is cloud operations? So each component here, as you see as we go from left to right, is going to kind of need to be in place as you move down the line here. So you'll have different tools to actually build out those resources. Some of these, as you can see here, like Terraform and Resource Manager, will help you automate a lot of these deployments as you put them within your OCI environment. You're also, once you have those built, you're going to want to be able to configure those resources using some tools such as Ansible to configure those resources once they're within your environment. Once those exist, right, you want to also know what's going on within those resources. You want to see different performance metrics, get the health of these different resources and determine, is there action that needs to be taken? How are these different resources performing? So you'll have different tools for monitoring those as well. Also, based off of that, you're going to want to protect those resources either through actions such as using the event service or utilizing Oracle functions to kind of automate some of those actions to help you protect and react to things that could be happening within your tenancy. And securing it, we'll go over the audit service at the end too. We want to see what's actually happening. What are users doing? What are the actions that have been taking place within your tenancy? And then all the way at the end here, governing your resources. We have the security quick start coming up next week as well, but we're going to talk about this a little bit here. Identity and access management, that's going to be in place to actually control who can do what within cloud operations. So all of these are going to be part of operations, part of the discussion that we're going over today. And each of these tools will kind of touch upon each stage of this cycle as we go through the slide deck.
And I think it's important to note here, Joey, that you're really sort of talking about a theme of automation throughout all of these things, right? You can certainly go out into the cloud console and build VMs manually and treat them, as individual servers. But if you're going to operationalize a cloud deployment at scale, it's important to have both a provisioning automation in the form of like deploying resources into the cloud through Terraform and Resource Manager in our case, and then that sort of post-build sort of operating system enablement with Ansible kind of ties together the provisioning not only of the resources, but also of the roles. And then you go through and determine when, what KPIs you care about in terms of performance or health or availability. And you can take remediative actions directly through events and functions to actually fix problems when they occur. And then kind of all the way at the end, assuming that all your automation has worked 100% of the time is great, but also verifying it with, audits and ensuring policies are in place appropriately to make sure things aren't changed out of bound from that golden that you expect.
Exactly. So a lot of this stuff, we want to make sure that these tools are helping your role within the cloud a lot easier to deploy, a lot easier to manage. So a lot of the automation, as Creighton mentioned, is going to be built in, and a lot of these tools are going to help you build that automation into your deployments if it's not already there already within the service. So exactly. And here we're going to talk about, as mentioned at the beginning, the different ways to access OCI. And you can see there are a lot of different ways you could see here on the screen right now. You have the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Console. So that's going to be just that interface that will go in at the beginning. You've probably seen this within some of our demos previously, where you can navigate to all of the different services, view a lot of different information, and navigate through that graphical user interface there. But you also have access to the command line. So that's going to provide the same core functionality as the console, but a lot of additional commands that you can utilize to take action within your tenancy as well. You can view resources, list resources, run commands to deploy scripts or work with other aspects of your environment there. You have Oracle Cloud Infrastructure APIs. So REST APIs, they're going to use your HTTPS requests and responses. So lots of the different, if not all of the different services within OCI are going to have different API endpoints that you can utilize. So you can utilize and access those resources with those different API commands there. There's also a lot of different software development kits, depending on what language you want to use. We have Java, Python, Ruby. I think there are a couple others as well that you can utilize when writing out or scripting things within OCI. There's also Ansible and Resource Manager. Olivia will be touching on that a lot later on in the presentation. Resource Manager is going to be what you're going to use to manage those Terraform scripts, so infrastructure as code. And so you'll have Terraform and you'll be able to manage, deploy, check for changes within those Terraform deployments using those Terraform scripts with Resource Manager. So you can see there's a lot of different ways in which you can interact with OCI. And we're going to try to cover these as we go through the presentation today.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, no matter what method you choose, be it Ansible or Terraform or Resource Manager or the Cloud Console, they're all going to interact with the APIs. And many of those need authentication credentials. One of the benefits that we'll show as part of this is interacting with Cloud Shell, which makes it really easy for you to call those SDKs and APIs without having to manage credentials. It sort of inherits that role from your session, which makes it really easy to programmatically interact with OCI without having to worry about downloading keys and making sure they're safe and secure.
And you mentioned Cloud Shell Crate, and that's actually the first one we're going to touch upon here. So as you mentioned, that's going to be this free service, basically that in-console command line, that in-console terminal that you can use with all of the different pre-configured libraries, packages, everything you would need to interact with your resources within OCI. That's going to be already installed on this user-based Cloud Shell terminal that you're going to have within the console. And I'll go show you this in a second. But a lot of this, you'll have your own storage. I think you get 5 GB of storage. That's going to be persistent storage. So it'll be there, I think, up to 6 months if you don't use it. But as long as you continue to go in and utilize Cloud Shell, that will remain persistent for you to have access to it. And you could do lots of the different commands that you would normally do, right? You could list out your resources. You could access different scripts that you write within Code Editor, which we'll talk about here in a second. You could also go through and you can SSH into your instances from Cloud Shell. There's really just your in-console command line that will be set pre-authenticated for your user session once you are in the OCI console. And going along with Cloud Shell, you also have the code editor. So this is a fairly new feature that we have within OCI, and it's going to provide an in-console code editing environment so that you can edit your code, update your service workloads, update your scripts without having to, let's say, switch between the console and maybe the local development environment that you currently use. So you could perform different code updates for your varying services. You could create and deploy functions. You could edit Terraform configurations, use with the Resource Manager that we'll talk about in a second. You could call APIs using the code editor as well as you program your different scripts within the console. And you can see there's going to be built-in sections to work with functions, to work with Resource Manager, and to work with a couple other pieces here as well that I'll pop up in the console. It's also can integrate with, as you can see, GitHub, right? You can have a Git integration so you can access different repositories and work with them within Code Editor as well. So really just providing you with that environment within the console and integrates in with Cloud Shell so you can access things directly from there as well. And you can have them side by side and view them within your screen in the console, and helps you work across both. And now let me hop into the console real quick and we can see where to access both Cloud Shell and Code Editor and just show a couple of quick commands that you can run to just give you an idea of how both of these services work. So let me switch over to the console quickly. All right. And here at the top right, you've maybe seen the console before from our previous demonstrations, but this is the Oracle Cloud homepage. At the top of the homepage, you'll see the region here, but you'll have these two icons for Cloud Shell and for Code Editor. So if I go into Cloud Shell, you can see I have this individual session for my user here. And this is going to be on a Linux box in Ashburn. So here I could do in a couple of different things, but I could also view all of the different packages that are pre-installed here as well. So we can see that different Docker libraries, right? So you can see that this is already pre-configured within Cloud Shell for you to use. You don't have to download any of this onto your local machine. Same with Kubernetes. You could view these as well. And then even a lot of the OCI commands that you could want to access through the command line, right? Those are already going to be here pre-configured and pre-installed for you to use.
Yeah, and
Also,
this makes it nice, especially if you're working with multiple cloud providers. You don't have to worry about version conflicts or library dependency conflicts or anything like that. I mean, basically everything you need to work with OCI is right here in Cloud Shell.
right, and they're all going to be updated for you as well. So you could view the versions of the different packages that you have as well. If I wanted to see, let's say, the Python version that we're running, right? I could go and view that, and I don't actually have to go and run through the updates to have access to these different packages, which is really useful as well. And if I wanted to maybe navigate through the console, if I wanted to view compartments, for example, I could go in and view the compartments that I have within OCI. So I could list those out. Oh, hold on, I have to navigate real quick. All right, and then now we'll go. Oh, there's the, sorry, no S. Right, now I can see all the different compartments at the root level. Since I didn't specify a child compartment, I could view the compartment list here. And I could, if I wanted to go in further and let's say view resources within a subcompartment as well, I could go in and specify that subcompartment. So this would be the one for our team compartment here. So you just have that OCID, you can navigate to that, and then you can see the subcompartments within that list. I also could run a query within here if I wanted to maybe search for resources within my environment. So if not just right now, we're just looking at the compartment list, but I could also, let's say, look for all resources that are running within my tenancy. I could run that. This is gonna be a long query, so it'll only show me a couple of different results. But here, give it a second to run. Right now we're running and showing all of the non-terminated, all of the resources within my OCI environment that are not listed as terminated. So all the running or paused instances that I have within my tenancy, and that's one way you could view that. We also have what's called Tenancy Explorer. So you could view all of your resources through what's the Tenancy Explorer in the governance section. So there I ran a command to view all of these different resources, and you could change that query to maybe view a different status or view a different attribute of those resources if you wanted to filter there. But I could go in and do that from the Tenancy Explorer as well to view some of these. So you could view from those different compartments. You could do that at the root level, or you could go into, let's say, the team compartment that I was in. Vision Corp is one of the mock company that we use for a lot of our demonstrations. But I could go and view different resources from here and then filter by that resource type after this loads. But this would be one section that you could do that as well. So you could see the different resources within your compartment level here. So from the command line, a lot of the stuff that you can do within the console, you can also run from Cloud Shell, showing that here. The other piece, I'll quickly touch on Code Editor and then we'll get into the rest of it. So Code Editor, you can see these are working side by side. So this could be the terminal that you're using for your Code Editor scripts. And you could, let's see, give it 1 second to open up. So you could see your different directories here. So this is for my user. I have a file within here. This is just really simple script that you can then access from the terminal. You could have the new terminal instance open from Code Editor. You could also access that script from here. So if I wanted to go and just call that file, just using Python, so I could go in here, have that command. You can see the output from that script within the terminal here. And you could have this, if you have a GitHub repository that you would like to utilize, you could do all of your different actions to work with GitHub within here as well. And then you have some of the different pre-built plugin areas for something like functions. So if you want to use those serverless functions, if you want to have your data science scripts as well, you can access those through here, as well as Terraform with Resource Manager. So all of those can be utilized within Code Editor, and straight from the console working with Cloud Shell.
Well, I'm a huge fan of VI as a development environment. Sometimes it is nice to have syntax highlighting and other functions by a graphical editor as well. So I think this is really cool.
And you can do it across, I think, several different areas for different languages as well. So just make sure you have the package, which should already be there, and you should be good to go. Olivia, I will now hand it over to you.
Thanks, Joey. All right, so in this next portion, I'll mainly be focusing on Resource Manager, which is going to be more of Terraform as a service. It's going to help you automate the process of provisioning your infrastructure. So I'll be covering a few slides over that, and then I'll be jumping into the console to show you how to get started with Resource Manager as well as some best practices. But before I do that, I just want to give a little bit of background specifically on infrastructure as code. So it just lets you define what you want your infrastructure to look like. So essentially, it's just a way of codifying your infrastructure so you can use a tool such as Terraform to create the in-state infrastructure that you want to build. So this can be maybe a 3-tier web application architecture, it can even be the VCN on this slide deck. And so you have that self-documenting infrastructure where you can define everything up front, and you can do this using HashiCorp, or you can do this using JSON. But just the main difference between HashiCorp and JSON is that HashiCorp is going to let you comment your code. So Creighton, you kind of touched upon this at the beginning of the presentation, but why might you use infrastructure as code as or Terraform? What are the benefits of doing so?
Well, that's a really great question. And before I answer that, I want to add one thing, which is, when OCI Gen 2 was being developed, rather than inventing a new declarative configuration language like, CloudFormation or some of the other cloud provider specific tools, we kind of realized that the Terraform was best of breed in that space, and we went down the path of just leveraging it. So we put together the Terraform provider for OCI. And, stepping back a little bit at a higher level, infrastructure as code really gives you the ability to build a template that is parameterized. So, think of a parameter like the number of CPUs or the amount of memory or the subnet that a machine might be on, tags, that sort of thing, and provide that kind of consistent structure throughout all of your business units. So everybody uses the same template and nobody has to reinvent the wheel several times. The nice thing that gives you is kind of consistency from a deployment perspective. You can pull the parameters that you don't want users choosing and embed them into the template. It also gives you the ability to kind of make simple changes in one place and deploy in multiple areas. So realistically, the benefit, in my opinion, is consistency across your environment and ease of implementation from a developer perspective.
Definitely, it makes it easier to accelerate your application architectures or infrastructure that you want to deploy with those reusable modules.
Absolutely, yeah. The reusability is key there. You create the building blocks and then your architecture becomes like little Lego.
And then just before I dive into Resource Managers, kind of want to touch upon scripting and full automation, because going back to scripting, the OCI CLI is kind of a small footprint tool that you can use on its own or with the console to complete OCI tasks. And then combined with a shell script, it can be quickly used to create shareable scripts and provide consistency and control over your deployments. And then if you want to administer and monitor cloud resources from a central location, the OCI CLI enables that, so you have that central repository and that consistency and control over your deployments. And then going into full automation, so with Resource Manager or Terraform as a service, you get full automation in deploying your infrastructure. So a Terraform configuration codifies your infrastructure in declarative configuration files. And then Resource Manager allows you to share and manage infrastructure configurations and state files across multiple teams and platforms.
Yeah, and that state file is key, right? Open source Terraform provides kind of that local file, and there's ways to put state files in a shared location, but the integrity of that state file is super critical to your deployments, especially if you're working on multi-person or multi-team development organizations. You need to make sure that the state file is synchronized across all of the users or developers that will be doing that deployment. Resource Manager gives you that sort of centralized state file. So you can use Terraform scripts just like you normally do and deploy them through Resource Manager so that Oracle and Resource Manager as a service manages the integrity of that state file. So it can't get out of sync because there's only one safe source.
Correct. And I'll be showing that in the console as well, how you can download your state file or keep track if there are any changes to your infrastructure from that state file. Right, so diving into Resource Manager. So it's a fully managed service that lets you provision infrastructure resources on OCI using Terraform. So once again, it's like Terraform as a service. So it allows you to use that infrastructure as code model mentioned to automate provisioning across your different OCI resources from compute, networking, load balancers, block and object storage, all those different OCI resources. And one thing to note, it also integrates with identity access management, so you can define granular permissions for Terraform operations. So for your different groups, kind of grant different permissions for working with Resource Manager. It's also good for making sure there's no parallel execution, so you don't have, two people trying to run an apply job at the same time on a given stack. You'll see in the console that only one job at a time can run on a given stack. And also it currently has support for the CLI, SDK, and the console. All right, so going into the flow of how Resource Manager works. So the first step is that you're going to want to plan and assess the resources that you want to be provisioned from your stack, or those collection of those different Terraform files for your infrastructure. So this is where you maybe check the variable declarations or the details of the VCN that you want to be deployed. But at this point, it's not actually provisioning anything. You're just reviewing what will be provisioned if you run this apply job right here, which goes ahead and actually provisions that infrastructure. And then just going back to what Creighton said earlier, the state file is very important. So after you've run that plan job, if you want, you can review your state file. So it's going to have key information about the state of your resources, and also maps your stack's resources to your configuration. So you can view that if needed. And then lastly, if you ever just want to destroy the infrastructure that was created, you can go ahead and do so, but it's going to deprovision all the resources that were created in that apply job. So really with Resource Manager's 3 steps, where you're planning the infrastructure that you want to be provisioned, and then you're actually applying it, and then you can go ahead and destroy that, or you can update your infrastructure. And then just one more thing before jumping into the console. So since Terraform is open sourced, you can use your own Terraform files when working with Resource Manager, but all you must do is make sure that your provider configuration is adjusted to use Resource Manager. So omitting certain information from your provider configuration to make it match with Resource Manager, and then the rest of your Terraform files will remain the same. And then just once again, you see on the slide that it does integrate with identity access management, so you can grant different permissions to different groups to have certain access to Resource Manager. Right, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and hop into the console.
Yeah, and I know you'll show this too, but as you run through Resource Manager, you saw some of the requirements in that text file were API key and secrets and that sort of thing. The other nice thing about Resource Manager is that, again, it's going to inherit the role that you have when you log into the console, so it's not going to ask you for additional credentials.
So to first get started with Resource Manager here, once again, is the OCI console. So Resource Manager is going to be under Developer Services right here, and then you'll see Resource Manager right here. So if you're brand new to Resource Manager, this is a great place to get started. So you can go ahead and take a tour. I'll kind of walk you through all the different steps of getting started. So that's an option. And there's different ways that you can create a stack, and I'll go into that in a moment. But that stack is just going to be a collection of all those different Terraform files for the infrastructure that you want to deploy. So if you're wanting to deploy a 3-tier web application architecture, you're going to have a Terraform file for the database, VCN, compute instances. You're going to have a Terraform file for all those different resources. And that stack is going to be a collection of all those different Terraform files. And once again, there's different ways that you can create that. So you'll see some documentation on the right-hand side. So some hands-on learning, templates, tutorials, so you can explore that. You can also see what's new with Resource Manager Terraform. You also see support for code editor. So as we just saw Joey cover that, there's more information right here. So you'll see all of that listed. And then if you ever just want to play around with Resource Manager, you can deploy a sample e-commerce application using always free OCI. So you can do this using free resources just to kind of get a feel for Resource Manager and how it works with the sample infrastructure. You'll see that there's other examples as well, but if you just want to use always free, you can. And then lastly, there's some video tutorials right here. So if you just want further resources, you can find that here. But once again, just great place to get started with Resource Manager. So the first step, actually, let me navigate to the correct compartment. So just working with a fictitious company named Vision Corp and their environments. Let me navigate to here. Yeah, so the first step is going to be creating your stack. And so you can do this from your own configurations because once again, Terraform is open sourced. You can pull in your own configuration, just need to make sure that it's compatible to work with Resource Manager. And then From there, you can also select an Oracle provided template. So right here, you can explore these different quick starts right here. So maybe you can get a stack for a highly available web application with auto scaling. You can kind of use that as a basis and modify. So here are some quick starts that you can explore.
Yeah, and to add on to that too, we have a GitLab repository with a number of quick start files as well. I gave a demo not too long ago to a customer where I deployed an entire HPC cluster from a Terraform script directly from that, which included not just the Terraform script, but also an automated Ansible deployment and a number of other pieces that came with it. So really the sky's the limit with respect to what Terraform can deploy and manage here.
All right, and you can actually deploy from a source code control system, as you mentioned. So that is another option that we'll be discussing today as well. But yeah, you have different quick starts. You can get service specific, for like a compute instance, autonomous transaction processing database. So you can browse these different services as well as different architectures. So once again, a sample e-commerce application. So you can browse these Oracle provided templates and then modify from there. You also do have a source code control system, so you can select your Terraform configuration from GitHub, GitLab, or DevOps. You just need to fill out this information right here, but you can pull from there if your Terraform files are, once again, like in GitHub or something, you can choose that as an option. And then lastly, you can actually create a stack from an existing compartment. And just to show you how this works, so you select your compartment for resource discovery. So I'm just going to choose this sample compartment right here, and then you choose your region for resource discovery. And then you can create a stack for all Terraform provider services, or you can do this for selected. And so you'll see that there's different services that you can explore right here. So for instance, if I choose the database provider services, it's going to collect the different database services in this compartment. And I'll kind of show you what that looks like in a moment, but you can explore these different Terraform provider services to get a stack or the Terraform files for.
Yeah, and the nice thing about that is if say you're learning and you're going and manually building and making a bunch of changes to a service in OCI, once you get it to that steady state where you feel like it's production ready and capable, you can actually just download the template to make that sort of the standard moving forward. There may be some changes that'll be required to that template in terms of, what parameters do you want to pull out and things of that nature, but you'll have, probably 90% of the code ready to go, and you can basically just take that and run. So it's nice. You can kind of take that sort of crawl stance where you deploy things manually in the console and then very quickly pivot to a walk and a run with respect to the Terraform deployments.
Right, definitely. There's some modifications I have to make, but it definitely does most of the heavy lifting for you. And then you could just create a name for your stack description, and then you have to specify where you want to create your stack. And then once again, at this point, it's not actually provisioning this infrastructure, it's just creating that stack for you. So that's all you need to specify, like where you want it to be created. And then you just go to next and then review, and then it'll go ahead and create that stack for you. But I already have a stack example right here for a compute instance. But before I go there, there's actually another way that you can create a stack. So if I go into networking and then go to VCN, if I click create VCN right here, I can fill out all this different information for my VCN. And then you'll see at the bottom that I can just create this VCN as is, or I can save this as a stack, which will give me that Terraform file that I can then use with Resource Manager. So I just want to show that that is another option outside of the Resource Manager page to create your stack. All right, so going back to that compute instance stack right here. So this is what it's going to look like for your stack. So you'll see your plan job, your apply job, and your destroy job. And just to show you that, once again, only one job at a time can run on a given stack, I'm going to go ahead and run this apply job right here. Click apply. And so if I go back to here, refresh this page, we'll see that it's now locked out. So I cannot run any one of these jobs until this job right here finishes. So once again, just make sure that you don't have, by any chance, two people trying to run an apply job at the same time. So it's good for ensuring that. And then just to show you what,
I'm sorry, I mean, that just goes back to managing the state file integrity, right? You have two apply jobs running at the same time, they'll overwrite the state file and bad things happen to the stack at that point.
Definitely. We'll definitely dive a little bit more into that state file, and then also why you want to make sure that you're making changes through Resource Manager and not manually in the console, because that state file is very, very important. So just to show you what one of these jobs looks like, let me see if I can find, here we go. So here's a plan job. So whenever you're running a job in Resource Manager, you're gonna have these logs generated as it's running. So you'll see something like terraform has been successfully initialized. And then in this plan job, it will let you know that terraform will perform the following actions if you run that apply job. So you'll see that this core instance will be created. You'll see some details for that. So this just lets you review what will be applied. But once again, at this point, it's not actually applying anything. And then if I look at an apply job right here, so it's going to be pretty similar. You're going to have these logs generated. It's going to say something like terraform has been successfully initialized. But this time you'll see these resources actually being created. So you'll see a status right here. And then at the end, you should see something like apply complete, your outputs. And if you don't want to scroll all the way down to see your outputs, you can actually click right here to view that. But usually you should see that the apply is complete. But let's say that you get an error when you're running an apply job. Resource Manager does not automatically roll back when you get errors. So instead, your Terraform state file will be partially updated with any resources that did successfully complete. And a few reasons why you might get an error when working with Resource Manager is usually due to some kind of limit. So it might be a service limit that's set by Oracle, or it might be a quota limit set by an admin. So let's say Oracle set a service limit of 50 VCNs for your tenancy, and you try to provision infrastructure through Resource Manager that's going to exceed the number of VCNs. You're going to get an error saying, hey, you need to request a service limit increase. Or once again, you might get an error because of a quota limit set by your admins on compartments. So maybe your admins set a limit of 30 VCNs. And once again, you're trying to provision infrastructure that's going to exceed that number of VCNs. You're going to get an error. And Resource Manager is pretty good about letting you know why you got an error. So it's usually due to some kind of limit. So this is another reason why you might get an error, just goes back to that state file, is you do not want to deploy your infrastructure with Resource Manager and then make manual changes in the OCI console, because when you try to run, like another apply job, you're going to get errors. And this is because your current infrastructure does not match what's in that current state file. So you want to be making sure that you're making all your changes through Resource Manager and not manually in the console, or else you'll get some errors when you're running jobs in Resource Manager. And then just going back to the console actions right here. So we'll see that this apply job succeeded. So now you can run another job now that that job is finished. And so another action that you can take from the console is you can import your state file. So you can do that here. You can also run a drift detection report, which I'll go into in a moment, which kind of helps you see if maybe your resources aren't in sync from that state file. You'll also see that you can download the most recent Terraform state file right here. So you can download that and view that in Visual Studio or Atom or wherever needed. And you'll see a few other actions like deleting the stack or moving resource. And you'll also see for each of these jobs right here that you can view the state file. And if I click into this job right here, you can download the Terraform configuration. So you can get the stack for this job, and you can also get the Terraform state file for this job. So you can download that all from the console. And then once again, you can run a drift detection report. If you ever just want to make sure that your resources are in sync and good to go, you can do that, because when you run a plan job, it's not going to catch any errors. It's only going to be during that apply job. So if you ever just want to check before running an apply job, you can. So if I go to run drift detection now, you can do this on all resources, or you can do this on selected resources. And just to show you what that looks like, it's going to be under work request. And I'll just click into this and then view drift detection report. And so in this drift detection report, we'll see that all these resources are in sync, they're good to go. But if something, once again, was manually changed in the console, you'll get the drift status right here that's not in sync, and it helps you kind of narrow down what might have been changed. So you can kind of keep track of that right here.
Yeah, and the nice thing about that is you can actually run this to go see if your resource has been changed out of band by somebody in the console. So you can sort of take that and take action, figure out why does somebody have more access than they should? Were they fixing an issue? And you can see the details of the changes as well.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, so this is an overall overview of how Resource Manager operates. And then lastly, just one thing I want to show, because you can download your Terraform state file and your stack from the console. I just kind of want to show what that looks like. So let me show you what that looks like. So I downloaded it from the console and pulled it up into Visual Studio, but we can see the Terraform file for the compute instance. So once again, this can be in JSON or HashiCorp, but HashiCorp is going to kind of just let you comment your code. And so we'll see that's following that infrastructure as code model mentioned. It's really just codifying your infrastructure. So you can see all the different details for your compute instance right here, like source details, metadata, all that different information right here. And then this is going to be your state file. So once again, it's really key because it's mapping the state of your infrastructure. So you can view that here if needed and make any changes. All right, that concludes the Resource Manager portion of the demo. So Joey, I'll pass it over to you to go over monitoring and notifications and events. Oh, Joey, I think you're on mute.
I am indeed. Thank you, Olivia. So we went over the different ways in which you can access OCI, some of the tools that you can utilize to manage those different resources. We walked through some automated provisioning with Terraform and Resource Manager. Now, once you have these resources in play in your OCI console, in your OCI environment, you're going to want to know, how are these resources performing? What's happening within those resources? Who's taking action upon those resources? And then being able to be notified of some of these things and be able to take action upon that. So maybe you want to remediate some issues, or like Creighton mentioned, maybe somebody went and provisioned some resource in the console within one of your environments that you utilize a Terraform script for. Right? You can view logs like we viewed those Terraform logs, and you can see what's happening and then maybe automate a response as well. So a lot of these tools that we're going to cover here in a second are going to help you in general with that process to see what's going on and then react. So here at the first part, we have monitoring. So there's going to be monitoring for many different metrics for each of your OCI resources. So let's say for your compute resources, we could look at CPU utilization, memory utilization. Within your database resources, you're going to have a lot of different metrics that are going to be available for you to use as well. And within those monitoring metrics, we can set alarms to maybe alert you if certain usage, maybe certain instances are running hot and you want to be alerted from that, right? That could all be set up as an alarm within the monitoring service. We go down to logging, and so different types of logs that you can view as well. So we viewed those Terraform logs, but you could also view audit logs for user interactions on your different resources. There's different custom logs, security logs, service logs, depending on what that resource is. You're going to have different types of logs available for you to go in, look at, and take action upon there as well. So logging is kind of that single pane of glass for all of your different logs that you can view. Notifications and alarms. So based off of what you have seen happen within your tenancy, or maybe there's certain thresholds that you select for your alarms, right? Monitoring can work with notifications and alarms as well. You can have certain people be notified through different avenues. So email, Slack, PagerDuty, other third-party applications that you may want to utilize, right? You can make sure that the right people are informed when any changes are made or any thresholds are reached. And then Olivia just gave a great demo on Resource Manager. So another piece that can work with these other services for automation. We'll touch upon each of these here in a little bit more detail. So that first piece, right, we have OCI monitoring. So really, this is just giving you insight into what's happening for your different resources. So here you can see we have our different customer applications, services to run those applications and those resources associated with them. Same with OCI infrastructure resources. You're going to have that raw metric data that can then be aggregated and viewed within the OCI console or different monitoring tools that you have available to you. And then based off of those different metrics, right, you can have triggers based off of, okay, is it running hot? Send a message, or your resources are running as they should, or within that utilization amount that you have targeted, right? You get to set a lot of these thresholds for your alarms. You get to determine what that means. And then based off of this, right, you could utilize monitoring to take action upon that. Maybe that means you need to scale up, scale out, right? You have different ways of taking action based off of these different metrics that you see.
Yeah, and that can be integrated with things like health checks and all that stuff too, to automatically remediate not just, specific CPU or metric related incidents. You can actually take action if things are broken, right? And that's kind of the cool part about the cloud is once you got everything automated to a point, you can really just, if a node's having trouble, you can just shut it down, destroy it, and reprovision another one or add one to scale out versus scaling up. It's an interesting mindset shift, but once the automation is in place, it really enables that kind of next gen self-healing application deployment model.
Right. And then if something is, let's say it's not just a usage trigger, right? You could have an action taking place. So yes, let's say something goes wrong as well. You have a lot of these that are going to work together in this environment that we're talking about for OCI operations, right? And another piece of that is the notification service. So you could see monitoring that we just talked about, that is just one area that can trigger a notification so that either A, you can go in and take that manual action, or B, like you mentioned, have those automated actions in place so that maybe you don't need to actually go in and do that yourself. It'll allow you to expand. It'll make your life within operating OCI a whole lot easier. So here, notifications, you're just subscribing to a particular topic related to what your input is. And then you are saying, I would like to be notified through whatever means you choose, right? Whether that's one of these that you see here on the right, or I could take some of those actions like through Oracle functions that we'll talk here afterwards. So what goes along with notifications is the event service. When you hear us talking about notifications, we'll usually say notifications and events, because they're two services that really do work very closely with each other. The events service is going to have different areas that you can configure in order to have certain actions or responses to these events. So you're going to have these rules where you are going to define the event that you care about, and then you're going to have trigger an action if that event occurs. So one of those actions could be to trigger a notification and send that to someone. Or maybe one of those actions could be to invoke a function to have that automated response to whatever that change in your resource was. So one example we'll go over is like that there's let's say your web application firewall policy and somebody changes that, right? You have a change in that resource. That could be an event that you have defined. And then you could have a response based off of whatever that event was. So that's just one way to trigger designating something, a change within OCI, and then a way for you to take action or be notified upon that. And you can kind of see a theme here as we're stepping through each of these services, right? Where it's kind of a chronological of how some of this stuff would work. So you have an event, you could send out a notification. You have an event, you could trigger a function, right? So just talking through how each of these services can work together. And functions, this is the serverless platform so that you can deploy applications or take action without having to worry about that underlying infrastructure. And functions have a lot of different use cases. Maybe you want to transform files and store them in object storage, or maybe you want to extend your SaaS applications. Maybe you want to update database tables, right? So there's a lot of different things that you can utilize Oracle functions for, and you can create these different serverless applications to then be deployed in a very quick and automated fashion. So Creighton, I don't know if you want to talk about any of the different use cases that you've seen that are really useful for Oracle functions that you've seen with your customers.
Yeah, it's interesting too because right, functions is equivalent to Lambda on AWS as well, and you build entire websites and integration platforms on that. So functions as a event response, sort of function is important. So you can certainly take action on things that are broken. You do have to write code for that. One of the big use cases though is object storage notifications. So if you can build sort of an ETL pipeline where as soon as an object gets dropped into an object storage bucket, that can fire off an event which can trigger a function, which can cleanse the data and load it into an autonomous database, for example, or do some sort of processing on it. So it's kind of an event-driven data ingestion platform. But again, also you can put a function behind an API gateway and build a whole application on top of it. So the nice thing about functions is that you really only worry about the code that deals with kind of the widget that you're working with, right? So if it's the data set, it's the ingest and it's the upload. If it's the event, it's the payload from the event message and the code that you're going to go mess with. You don't have to worry about credentials or kind of the underlying care and feeding of the ecosystem that supports it. So no VMs to manage or anything like that. It's really, really cheap because you're only paying for the execution, and it's super lightweight. So there are some limitations, right, in terms of maximum run times and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, it's kind of the go-to platform for simple event-based responses.
Perfect. Yeah. And then just as you can even see on the screen here, and as Creighton was talking about, the variety of use cases for functions is very large and is really going to help you. You do have to code out a lot of this, but it's really going to help you with a lot of that quick automated types of actions and applications that you're going to want to run. And we have, how much time? We have about 7 minutes left. So I will quickly hop in and look at events and notifications. And then Olivia, do you think we should take some Q&A with the time we have left, or did you want to cover 1 or 2 more things?
Depending on time, maybe cover a few slides or just take Q&A.
Okay. Let me hop into the console real quick, at least show you where to navigate and utilize events and notifications. So here we're back in the OCI console. As always, you can navigate to different services using the hamburger menu here in the top left, but you can also get to all of your resources through here as well. So I went in, I could type in notifications, and I could navigate to the service that way too. So just a quicker way to access things. You can see for notifications, we have what are called topics. So there's just the types of notifications that people will subscribe to. So I could create a topic. It's really just a name and description. So just that kind of logical piece for you to then store your subscribers. So if I go in here to, let's say, the WAF policy change, I can see I have this topic already made. And then you have this create subscription section. So this would be if I want to subscribe to this notification, I would create the subscription, choose the protocol in which you want this subscription to be through. So in this case, I just did email, typed in my email, and then you now have this subscription here that can be accessed through other services. So the main service that we're going to talk about that works with notifications is going to be the event service. And again, I can just navigate here, and easy to hop back and forth. And I can go into the event service and create rules. So this is going to be, okay, if this rule is triggered, then I will have this event. So if I create a rule right now, I have this rule for a WAF policy update, and I'll just show you how you would go in and configure that. So you would have that here, give it a description, and then you select the type of event that you want it to be. So what service it could be, or also if of a tag. What we're going to do is based off of the event type and pick the service that you would like this to work with. So we'll say this is going to work with the event firewall, and what type of events are going to be associated with the web application firewall. What do we actually want to be triggered here? So I'm going to do a policy update. So if I go WAF policy update, right, I have that. And then you say, okay, well, is this just any WAF policy update? Or do I want to specify for a particular WAF policy for a specific web application firewall? I could do it based off of an attribute, and that attribute could be a variety of things. So I could do it based off of changes within a compartment, or I could do it maybe with a specific resource. So I would go in there and then quickly go to that policy. Just copy the name of that. So just shop WAF policy. You put that in here. And then it says if that resource name matches you shop WAF policy. So I go in and select the action that I want to take based off of that event. So we talked about how events can work with notifications. So I could send out a notification, or I could trigger a function, or push to streaming. So just depending on what I want to do, I have these different types of actions that I can take with the event service. So for this case, I would select notifications, pick the compartment where I had that notification topic. I think it was all the way down in enterprise applications. And we have that WAF policy change topic that we created, and then you would have this rule for the event. So if I went in and changed that WAF policy, I would then get an email notification to the email I specified in my subscription. So you can see how that chain of actions would work here.
And this kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning of this, where you've got essentially, a security policy in place that you've deployed and you rely on, in this case, a WAF policy. Well, if somebody changes that out of band, you need to know, right? Because you need to make sure that your security compliance is still in place. And so this is the way to enable that.
Exactly. Yeah. A variety of events, a variety of actions that can help with security, can help with troubleshooting, right? A lot of different areas in which these can be applied. And we are pushing on time here. So I think it might be good to maybe touch upon some of the Q&A that we have left with the 3 minutes. What do you think?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm typing a response to one of the questions about object storage events right now, but there are, in that response, there are links to documentation for not only what services emit events, but also when you click on each one of those, it tells you a little bit about what those events look like. So the event isn't just a, hey, this service did a thing. It's going to give you a payload that you can interrogate to take action, right? So you don't have to go figure out what the event is in your code. You can really just read the payload, look for that, it's going to be a specific payload for each service, but parse it to figure out what event happened and then figure out your response action at that point. So it's fairly simple. If you've done any coding in Lambda, it's very similar to that, although not the same.
Thank you, Creighton. I don't know if there are any others here that we think would be good to answer now. We have about 1 minute left. We will also take a look at these and get to the ones that we didn't live on the call. So to make sure some of these that get answered to help you get the information that you need for some of this stuff.
There's a simple question. Can you use Resource Manager for integrations?
I think that's a pretty broad question. Is it possible to have some clarity provided there? Could we bring somebody off mute, or?
I don't know if we can do that. It can integrate with a lot of different aspects of OCI that we talked about today, right? We talked about it working with, you can utilize Resource Manager through code editor. You could utilize maybe different events or functions to trigger certain deployments. If you are talking about with, I don't know, like the integration service, I guess integration could be a broad range. So yeah, a little clarification would be helpful on that one.
Yeah, I mean, if you need to make an update to a stack, you can certainly drive that from an integration platform. You can certainly provision environments to do integrations. For example, if you want to spin up an instance that does a bunch of work and then goes away, you can trigger that from there. But at the end of the day, I think it's not an integration service in and of itself. It's more of a resource manager or a sort of provisioning orchestrator. And there was a question about using Terraform to update, edit an existing infrastructure. I'm answering that as well, but there's a Terraform construct called import that can be used to do that. So you would import an existing resource and then you could essentially manage it from Terraform.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Olivia, Joey, and Creighton. This was really a great session. Really appreciate your time and help. And big thanks to everyone for joining us today. Our next session will be after 2 weeks on November 15th, where we'll cover Oracle Cloud Security. So please go ahead and register now using the link I will just put in here. I added a link in chat window where you can go to find recordings of this session and previous sessions as well. So thanks again. Have a good day, everyone.